Good morning, good morning, good morning. My name is Ben Trady. I am the Worship and Creative Arts Pastor here at Zion. And if you are new or if you regularly attend, I want to say welcome. And on behalf of Debbie and Dr. Hall, they extend their welcome too. They want you to know that you are in the right place this morning. It is not by coincidence that you are here, and we're very excited that you're here. I have a sermon that I've entitled this morning, Perspective v. Circumstance. And it's the idea of looking at our circumstances and shifting our perspective. But to get things started, I wanted to tell a story about me and my buddy Tyler. Tyler and I are living up in Minneapolis at this time, and we are window washers, doing various routes all throughout Minneapolis. And we've been working together on a few routes, and we started this morning the same as any other morning. I'm grabbing up my gear. We're getting ready to go. He left his gear in his car. So we go where we dropped the car off last night. At least we're pretty sure it was right there. So we're retracing our steps, and we're like, no, the car was definitely here, but the car was not there. Someone had stolen Tyler's car. So we weren't going to work that day. Instead, we went back to the apartment, and we're filling out these reports. We're calling the police. And 3 days passed, and then eventually Tyler gets a call, says, hey, we found your car. We have it here at the impound. You can come pick it up, but just make sure you pick it up before our office is closed today. Otherwise, you're going to have to pay another $100 or so. And we're like, okay. So we went right away. Actually, I have a picture. Would you mind? Yeah, that's Tyler. You can tell he's disgruntled. So we get there really early. We get to the office. We go through the motions there, fill out whatever paperwork we need, and we're making our way through the various lots of the impound. And in our minds, we're both playing this game like it's probably on fire. You know, like the tires are taken off of it, the windshield bashed in. They took the license plate and, I don't know, made a fortune teller thing out of it. And we're building this scene that we're going to see when we turn the corner. And no, we turn the corner and it's just sitting right there. We called this car Green Bean. It was a green car. Nope, Green Bean's right there, just fine. We're like, okay. We went over. He opens up the car, and all of his window washing gear is there. And if you don't know stuff about window washing, they could have sold that gear for a pretty penny. And but no, it's all sitting right there. And like I said, we had been doing a bunch of routes together, so like all the cash that we had collected from our routes was bundled up, nice and big, real thick stacks. And it was in the center console, completely untouched. And we're self-employed at this point, so we're taking down our miles and everything, and we're looking at it, we're like, this car barely moved. What? And at this point, we become angry because it's been 3 days without the vehicle, right? We haven't been able to go to work for 3 days, and now Tyler has to pay like $300, $350+ to get his car back from the impound after it was stolen from him. He has to pay $300 to get his car stolen, and the least they could do is break it, you know? The least they could do is make it worth our while, you know? But instead, no. What it turns out is it was parked in the lot where it was allowed to be, and someone took it for a joyride for about half a block and then parked it where it shouldn't be. And then the police took it to the impound that night. That was extremely irritating. It was extremely irritating. So we're sitting in the apartment, we're fuming after this, and then after a while, I looked at him and I was just like, hey, we're both upset about this green bean thing. But maybe Here's a different way to look at it. We don't know what was waiting for us on the roads that day. We kind of took a second. You're right. We don't know. Yes, this is wildly inconvenient, and no one likes to pay $300 to have their car stolen. But we don't know what was waiting for us on the roads that day. We don't know what we've been saved from. And of course, this is all hypothetical. I don't know. And that's the thing, is like if we were saved from something, we would have no idea. But it's the idea of there are circumstances around us, and we get to choose the perspective we take a look at it. It's an idea of shifting our perspective v. circumstance. So our first point this morning is going to be your circumstances don't give you security. Jesus gives you security. And to start this section, I want to tell you the story about Joseph. Now, Joseph takes up chapters 37 through 50 of Genesis. So I'm going to paraphrase about 13 chapters worth of information. You're welcome. And so Joseph, son of Jacob, was very well liked by his father. So much so that his brothers hated him. They hated him. And the nail in Joseph's coffin was when his father Jacob offered him this beautiful coat of many colors. It was rich dyes and colors of implied expense. His brothers hated that, so they schemed, right? They schemed. They go out at one point and they dogpile on Joseph and they throw him in this empty cistern, and then they took a break to eat. Yep. I wonder how many people were saved in the Bible because they took a break to eat. They see some Ishmaelites off on the side, and they're like, "Oh, you know what? If we leave him here, the blood's on our hands. But if we sell him, then we're totally clean. We're in the clear." So in Genesis 37:28, it says, "So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver. And the traders took him to Egypt." Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers, his kin, his heart's blood, right? And from there, he was employed by Potiphar. But even though the circumstances around Joseph weren't ideal, he worked diligently for Potiphar. Quickly rose through the ranks and became second in command. He's like, "I'm going to trust you with everything, just hands off my wife." Simple enough. However, Potiphar's wife thought Joseph was kind of cute. And so she propositioned him. And he politely said, "No, I'm not allowed to go there." And then she accused him of rape. He tried to rape me, and that landed Joseph in jail. Landed him behind bars. So after some time, there were two others that came to jail. It was a baker and a cupbearer that worked for Pharaoh. And they both had dreams, and they were very uneasy about these dreams. They had no idea what these dreams meant. And so Joseph says, "Hey, I kind of know dreams, but with God's help, I can interpret them for you." He interprets them, and then three days later, they come true, just as Joseph said they would. And Joseph says this to the cupbearer as he's leaving. In Genesis 40:14, he says, "And please remember me and do me a favor when things go well for you. Mention me to Pharaoh so he might let me out of this place, for I was kidnapped from my homeland, the land of the Hebrews, and now I'm here in prison, and I did nothing to deserve it." So the cupbearer went back to work for Pharaoh and completely forgot about Joseph. 100%. Slipped my mind. That guy that really helped me out in a bind. We fast forward 2 years. Joseph has now been sitting in jail for 2 years for a crime he didn't do after being sold into slavery by his brothers. He's sitting there, and Pharaoh has this, he's in jail, and Pharaoh has this dream. And then suddenly, the cupbearer's like, "Oh, there was this young Hebrew man who helped me with dreams. Maybe he can help you with your dream." So Pharaoh pulls him out, and he interprets the dreams, and as a result, Pharaoh installs him as second in command of all of Egypt. Going from being falsely accused and in jail to being second in command of all of Egypt. He ends up leading the nation through 7 years of abundance, 7 years of famine, but he does it in such a way that during the 7 years of famine, people come to Egypt to get food. They come to Egypt for guidance. Our security cannot be found in what we have around us, in our circumstances. Our circumstances change, and often it's not because of things we did. If we put our security in those, we get shook. Our circumstances are just that. They're circumstances. But one of my favorite stories comes out of Acts 12. It's usually referred to as Peter's miraculous escape. Peter has been captured. He's put in jail. He's guarded by 16 plus soldiers, and 2 of them are chained directly to Peter. Peter was sentenced to be executed. And then the night before, it says this in Acts 12:7. Suddenly, there was a bright light in the cell. And the angel of the Lord appeared before Peter. The angel struck him on the side to awaken him and said, "Quick, get up." And the chains fell off his wrists. The reason I like this so much is there was a bright light, like an angelic flare. Right? And then in the next verse, the angel has to kick. So like some of the translations are strike, hit, kick. Had to punch the dude to wake him up because he was asleep. The implication here is he was asleep, deep sleep. I've been in ministry like 10 plus years, and still some of my hardest nights of sleep are on Saturday night, right? I've got all these things going through my mind. Did I prepare enough? What if this goes wrong? Well, what if this person can't show up? What if people get upset? But I've never had to try to sleep the night before my execution. And I would like to say that I would be like Peter, that I would have such a faith that the angel would have to kick me out of my REM cycle. You know what I mean? Peter was well aware that his security is not found in his circumstances. It's found in Jesus. 1 John 5:18, I am born of God, and the evil one does not touch me. Does not touch me. Our security cannot be found in our circumstances. Instead, it is found in Jesus. Our second point this morning, your circumstances don't define you. Jesus defines you. A few weeks back, Pastor Derek gave a great sermon about Gideon. Gideon was called by God to take out the Midianites, calling him mighty hero. And Gideon responds saying, I'm pretty sure you got the wrong guy. Judges 6:14. Then the Lord turned to him and said, go with the strength that you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you, my mighty warrior. Judges 6:15. But Lord, Gideon replied, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest of the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I'm the least of my entire family. In verse 16, the Lord said to him, I will be with you. I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if they were one man, as if you were fighting against one man. I will be with you. God's got it. Gideon defined himself as the weak of the weak, the smallest of the small, the biggest loser, the least. But God defined him as mighty warrior. He's like, no, I am well aware of your circumstances, but you're my mighty warrior. Imagine all the cool things we're going to do together. 2 Corinthians 5:17, this means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone, a new life has begun. In my years in ministry, I've heard people say, like, I'm an anxious person. I am a sad person. It just runs in my family. I can't help it. Stuff like that. We tend to take our circumstances and then we use them as surrogate identities. But God calls you son. He calls you daughter. He calls you heir, child, and beloved. These don't define you. I define you. Genesis 1:27, so God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Romans 8:15-17, so you have not received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves. The circumstances around you aren't going to define what's going on here. I'm going to. Instead, you received God's Spirit when he adopted you as his own children. Now we call him Abba, Father. For his Spirit joins with our spirit to affirm that we are God's children. And since we are his children, we are his heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs in God's glory. John 8:36, so if the Son sets you free, you are free indeed. Just like that angel saying, quick, get up, and the shackles fell off of him. Or when Pharaoh pulls Joseph out of the jail, in an instant, your circumstances can change because they're just circumstances. But God is a good, good God. Point 3, your circumstances don't give you purpose. Jesus gives you purpose. Now for this, and let me set the scene for you. We're going to talk about the book of Esther. Okay, and just some background context of things going on in Esther. Xerxes was king at the time, and like around this time, he had this 6-month planning meeting, right? Can you imagine being in a meeting for 6 months? It was a military strategy meeting, and they're like, we're going to get those Greeks. Okay, they have a 6-month meeting, and then at the end of it, they have like this 7-day feast, this 7-day celebration. It was a drunk fest. And towards the end of the celebration, under the influence of both pride and libation, and it's hard to tell which one is more intoxicating for Xerxes, he ordered his wife Vashti to present herself so that all may see her, but she refused the order. She was concerned that her dignity would be tarnished as she presents herself in front of these 7 days drunk men. That made Xerxes incredibly angry. But Xerxes was already kind of angry. He was an angry, angry person. There's accounts of these bridges that go across the Hellespont, and they were destroyed in a storm. And Xerxes got mad, and so he gathers up all the engineers because they built the bridge wrong, and he chops their heads off. Then he sends out soldiers into the water with whips, and they're told to lash the water 300 times for its insubordination. And then he sends soldiers in with shackles so that they can bind the water, and then they stab it with red-hot irons. This guy's crazy. He's just straight up crazy. But this sets the scene for Esther, under command of an angry, irrational king. And so they take their 6-month strategy, they go to implement it, and they fail. They fail hard. They do not defeat the Greeks. Instead, they come running back. So now we're looking 4 years later. Vashti's been demoted 4 years ago. And this is now, Xerxes is like, okay, I need a new queen now. And he eventually finds Esther and establishes her as queen. Another character here is the character of Haman, and he was honored. He was made a high official, and he goes on to say this in Esther 3, 8 through 9. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not to the king's best interest to tolerate them." And here's where it gets gross, guys. "If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasurer." Haman is talking about orchestrating the extermination of all the Jews, and Xerxes was in. I mean, come on, 10,000 talents of silver, that's a heavy purse. Mordecai, who was related to Esther, is a Jew. Esther is a Jew, and Mordecai comes to Esther and says, "Esther, you got to do something." And she's insistent. I can't do anything. This king is angry. He's volatile. He's quick to kill. He whips water. The dude's crazy. But Mordecai reminds Esther that the circumstances don't give you purpose, but God gives you purpose in those circumstances. The circumstances don't give you purpose. God gives you purpose in those circumstances. Esther 4:14. "If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arrive from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Mordecai's saying like, hey, God's a good God, and if you don't do it, someone else will. But God put you here for such a time as this. You have a purpose, whatever the circumstance. You have a purpose in that circumstance. Romans 5, 3 through 6. "We can rejoice too when we run into troubles and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance, and endurance develops strength of character, and character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. And this hope will not lead to disappointment, for we know how dearly God loves us, because he has given us the Holy Spirit to fill our hearts with his love. When we were utterly helpless, Christ came at just the right time and died for us sinners." Christ came for such a time as this. The circumstances surrounding Christ didn't define who Jesus was, but he had a purpose in those circumstances. God's looking down and he says, those are my children, And they're slaves to their own fear. They're slaves to their sinful nature. I need to set them free. Jesus, I need you to do this for me. Jesus even says in the garden, it says he's praying earnestly. There's blood involved. He says, Father, if there's any possible way, let this cup pass me by. And then eventually, no, your purpose in these circumstances are to be the perfect sacrifice, the cleansing lamb, for such a time as this. Jeremiah 1:5, I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. Before you were born, I set you apart. Now he's talking specifically to Jeremiah about his prophet ministry. But this is a promise guaranteed to all of humanity. No, you have a purpose. These are circumstances around you. You have a purpose that I have set you apart for. And if you don't do it, yeah, someone else will, but this is why I made you. Mighty warrior, let's do this. 1 Peter 2:9. But you are not like that, for you are a chosen people. You are royal priests, a holy nation, God's very own possession. As a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for he called you out of the darkness into this wonderful light. For his chosen people, for you are a chosen people. This is the way that the Israelites were described all throughout the Old Testament. But now Peter is pointing at all of humanity, Jew and Gentile. In this new covenant era, God has extended an invitation and adopted us into his family to become sons and daughters of God. And the beauty here is, like, you can't choose what family you're born into, and you can't choose what kids you have unless you adopt them. And God has said, no, I want to adopt you in. I want you to be a part of my family. I want you. Not because of anything you've done or anything you could possibly do, but simply because I love you. These circumstances don't give us purpose, but we have a purpose assigned to us through Jesus in the middle of our circumstance. And point 4, your circumstances don't bring life. Jesus brings life. For this, we're going to go to the book of John, chapter 11. We're talking about Lazarus. Lazarus was a very dear friend of Christ. It's like some translations, Lazarus, the one who Jesus loved, brother of Mary and Martha. Mary and Martha sent word to Jesus saying, Lazarus is dying. And Jesus says, chapter 11 of John, verse 4, but when Jesus heard about it, he said, Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this. After Lazarus has passed away, Jesus makes his way back to Mary and Martha's house. Jesus tells her, your brother will rise again. But now for context, Lazarus has been dead for days. John chapter 11, 24 through 26. Yes, Martha said, he will rise when everyone else rises on the last day. Yes, he will rise when everyone else rises. Like, she's mad. She's mad at Jesus. You could have done something about this. When everyone else rises that day, Jesus told her, no, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this, Martha? Then we jump ahead to chapter 11, 39 through 44. Roll the stone aside, Jesus told them. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible. Jesus responded, didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believe? So they rolled the stone aside, and Jesus looked up to the heavens and said, Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me, but I said this out loud for the sake of those standing around me, so that they will believe that you sent me. Then Jesus shouted into that dark, dank hole, Lazarus, come out. And the man came out, his hands and feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. Jesus told them, unwrap him and let him go. For some of us here this morning, listening online, there are situations that you've declared dead, like time, let's just call it. It's done. Things that you've tucked away, things that we've wrapped and buried, we've stuffed it down deep because the smell was terrible. But it sits there, and we know what's behind that rock, no matter how much we'd like to forget. We insist we have it handled, but then Jesus comes and he says, Hey, I'm so sorry. If you allow me, I'd like to help. I would like to breathe life into this dead situation for you. I know you're looking at foreclosure. Please let me help. I know that you and your dad haven't talked for years. Please let me help. I know you're angry. Please let me help. I know that you have papers there that say irreconcilable differences. Please let me help. I know the test came back positive. Please let me help. I can see that you're hurting and it breaks my heart. Please let me do what I do best, and that's bring dead things back to life. Matthew 7:7-8. Keep on asking and you will receive what you ask for. Keep on seeking and you will find. Keep on knocking and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives. Everyone who seeks finds. And everyone who knocks, the door will be opened. I remember when my parents were splitting up, getting their divorce, I was so mad and I was so hurt. There was one night in anger, I drove over to my dad's house, and I remember walking up the doorstep. I'm standing at the door, and I held my hand up to knock, and I couldn't. Everything that I wanted was on the other side of that door, like answers to my questions. I could even yell and say how hurt I was. I could reconcile. I could just hang out with my dad. Everything that I wanted on the other side of that door, but I couldn't even knock. I was frozen. And why? Why not? I mean, I could say he didn't deserve it, that he knows what he did, and I did say that. But it was just fear. Just simple, dumb fear. How many times do we have to do that? How many times do we have to stand inches away from life, from reconciliation? It's like we end up hiding in this castle we built around ourselves with a drawbridge up and a deep moat surrounding it. We filled it with our pride and we did it all out of fear. And then we have the audacity to say that Jesus doesn't care? But if we just take a second and we listen in the middle of this dark castle we built, if we listen carefully, we can hear Jesus on the outside saying, Lazarus, come out. Ben, come out. I don't want you to be in there. I want life for you, not death. One of my other favorite stories comes out of Ezekiel. It's the text regarding dry bones. Ezekiel 37:1-2. The Lord took hold of me. I was carried away by the Spirit of the Lord to a valley filled with bones. He led me all around among the bones that covered the valley floor. They were scattered everywhere across the ground and were completely dried out. This is the last and final step when something has died. It's called petrification. For reference, just think of the elephant graveyard in The Lion King. The Spirit tells Ezekiel to prophesy over the bones, over the bodies, over the death, over this dead situation. To prophesy, to say a specific thing that will happen in the future, to say out loud the things that you want in your heart, to earnestly, honestly, and authentically reach out to your Heavenly Father, to lower that drawbridge, to let Him in, to walk up to that door and to actually knock. Your circumstances don't decide. You decide, because your circumstances are just circumstances. Now, I'm not trying to belittle them. They're very real. But it's a matter of perspective. In preparing this, I found a quote from an artist, James Deacon, and it reads like this: "What you see depends not on only what you look at, but also on where you look from." Not what you're just looking at, but where you're looking from. It's a quote about perspective. In these circumstances, where are you looking from? Are you looking from the mindset of a victim or from a victor? Jesus promises victory, even over death. Victory over your circumstances. He says, I'm with you, I'm for you. And if I'm for you, who could possibly be against you? Who? I want life for you. And I want it abundantly. It's a message about shifting our perspective. Your circumstances don't give you security. Jesus gives you security. Your circumstances don't define you. Jesus defines you. Your circumstances don't give you purpose. Jesus gives you purpose. And your circumstances don't bring life. Jesus brings life. If you're here this morning or if you're listening online, please don't spend one more second a slave to fear. There's so much more for you. Jesus wants so much more for you. Victory over death. We haven't been given a spirit of fear, but one of power. So please, I invite you, if you're here, to go do business with God over there in the prayer corner, to let down that drawbridge, to let him in, to knock on that door, and to let him do what he does best, to bring dead things back to life. And this Wednesday is Ash Wednesday. We start the Lenten season on Wednesday. The Lenten season is just a way of remembering when Jesus was lost in the wilderness. It's our time to reflect, to walk through our own wilderness, to look at our circumstances and then point it from a mindset of victory. So please, this Wednesday at 12 noon or at 5:30 over at the sanctuary, it's a great time, the imposition of ashes and a time of reflection. And then Harvest Bible Chapel was very generous. They sponsored vertical worship to come to the surf. It's a free event. There's no reason not to go. Let's reorient. Let's do this right. Let's put our focus on God and walk in victory. Please rise for closing prayer.